Hello everybody, Willie Mayette here, creator of Jazz Edge. Welcome to Ask Willie Live. This is your time in which you can ask me any of your music-related questions. So if you have a question, I want to welcome you. If you're joining me on YouTube or Facebook, if you have a question, just go ahead and chat it on in. We'll be on for about an hour. And if you're joining me on Zoom, just go ahead and chat in your question, or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question that way. All right. So, who has a question?
I have a
Mark.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle, you had a question? Michelle, you just muted yourself. All right. Go ahead. Mark, you want to ask your question first?
Hi.
How you doing, Mark?
Great. So I started with essentials, piano essentials. I started in January, and your evaluation said I should start with advanced, or is it?
Mm-hmm.
But I looked at beginner, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this too. So I started with beginner.
Good.
And I am familiar with the circle of fifths and how it plays into everything. So I started out as C, G, D, and then it goes to F and B flat, which I decided I'm just going to go to A.
Sure.
And I was going to then continue to E and B. And then I was going to go back and maybe go the other way and go F, B flat, and down the other way. And I kind of suspected of listening to you on other issues that, hey, do what you want. But I just wasn't sure if there was any real reason why. Watching the videos, it seemed like it used to be organized where you followed the cycle, and that somehow along the way you decided to do it differently, and I wasn't sure why, or maybe that would be something I would want to do. That's my question.
Okay. And by the way, Mark, thank you very much for your testimonial as well. Mark submitted a very nice video testimonial, so I appreciate it. And I was able to edit the front and the back of it, so it's all good. All right, so let's start from the end goal. The end goal is you want to know all 12 major scales. There's absolutely no question or debate on that. All of us need to know all 12 major scales. Now, in terms of how long it's going to take you to get there, well, that's negotiable, right? I mean, I would say a year is a pretty, right amount of time for most people to be able to go through and be able to play all 12 major scales, all right? Now, does that mean you can't do it in 6 months? Well, no, you might be able to if you really work hard on it. You likely should not be able to go through and learn all 12 major scales properly within a month, unless, of course, you told me, oh, yeah, I played for 20 years and I took, 20 years off and now I'm coming back to it. Okay, that's a different story. But if you're just getting started, then it should take you more than, a month or two to go through all 12. But the basic point is, the end goal is to learn all 12 major scales. All right, so now with that end goal in mind and kind of a time frame for how long that should happen, then the next question is, well, which one do I start with and which order do I go in? So the first thing is in Piano Essentials, I'm glad you went to the beginner because you should definitely take a look at the pain, tension, technique lesson. I'm sure you probably already have. If you haven't, then take a peek at it, mostly for that grab technique because that's going to be really important for your scales. So you'll notice that we start with C, then go to G, then go to D. But then, we normally go to A, after that, right? Like following this circle of fifths, right? We end up changing, and I don't go up to A, and I don't follow the circle of fifths. Why? Because pianistically, you're more likely to be playing in the key of F or B flat. For not only the tunes that we're doing at the site, but then also just pianistically. The key of F is probably a little bit more popular than the key of A on the piano. That's not to say that F or A, either one is more important. It's just that you're likely going to see the key of F more than you see the key of A. That's why I push those scales to the front. You're absolutely right in that I have said several times that these are your lessons, so you get to do with them whatever you want, whichever order you go in. However, it's also very organized, and that's why I organized it in that manner, because a lot of those scales that you might not get into, like say the key of G flat, so is it better to learn the key of C and F and G, or go right to G flat? Obviously, you're not going to be playing in the key of G flat all that often. and especially if you're kind of new to the instrument, you're definitely not going to want to be playing in G flat right away. So it's better to learn those other scales first. So really, the order in which you go in the scales, it really doesn't matter. I mean, let's say that you were like, you wanted to torture yourself and like, no, I want to start with G flat for the very first scale. All right, well, if you want to do that and you're willing to be patient and go slow with it and get all of the fingering, then sure, there's nothing wrong with it. So there's really no benefit of one starting before the other. Now, one thing that I do suggest when you're learning your scales, if you want a really good way of really maximizing the potential of the scale and what it is you're learning, anytime you can link that with a song that you're playing, I always feel as though that's a better scenario. So let's just say, for example, you've gone through, you've done C, G, and D, right? You've done those 3 scales right there. So now you're going to do Misty, and it's in the key of E flat. And then you were going to move on to, say, the key of A, right, for the scale. Well, rather than doing A, why not do E flat and do the E flat major scale? Because then that's going to kind of link up with Misty. And then when you want to improvise over Misty and use that E flat major scale, right? So it's like, it kind of makes sense to do that. So that's another approach as well, is to kind of link the scales that you're working on, or whatever key you're working on, basing that off of the song that you're working on as well. But the short answer is, you could do it in whatever order you want. The ultimate goal is to learn all 12, so you could follow the order that I set out, or you could do whatever order you want. Okay? And I know that was a long answer, but a lot to cover. Michelle, did you have a question? And I'll get to you next, Steve.
Yes. Okay. So I see Mark. No problem. My question is the following. How do you, in solo playing, how do you work on the transition? How do you practice the transition between playing the left hand as you play it in the arrangements, which means you add some of the chords are, some of the notes of the chords are played with the right hand under the melody, and playing another kind of left hand if you want to improvise?
Okay, let me make sure I understand the question correctly. All right, so if we're going to take, like, we were just talking about Misty. So, right, so like there, like the E flat 7, I'm putting that thumb underneath there. So that's typically in the arrangement, when using shells, you have your melody, you have your shell, and then you throw in another note in there, yep. Right? So now you're saying in improvisation, is the question, do I still keep that thumb there while I'm trying to improvise, or what do I do in the left hand?
No, I guess the left hand, you play it differently. You play the chords differently. And for me, it's difficult to just have the chords enough in my mind to be able to play them different ways during the same song for the same tune I'm playing.
Okay, there's one thing I want to say about that, but let's go back for 1 second to make sure I'm getting this clearly. So you're asking that, when you play the arrangement, you play the chords one way, but are you saying that you feel like you need to play the chords differently when you improvise, or are you asking what are you supposed to be doing in the left hand when you improvise? I just need a little clarity on that.
Yeah, I think it's both. I suppose that in an arrangement, the chords sound good because all the notes are not only on the left hand, but also under the melody with the right hand. Bingo. So the chords don't have the same flavor if I just play the left hand as it is and improvise on the right hand.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's use the example of, we'll do My Romance because it fits a little bit better with all of these notes underneath. So in My Romance, the first part of it is, right? So like you're talking about all of this stuff in there, right? Like there's my melody, there's the shell, but when I put this in there, it adds some nice bite and tension to it that when I just do this with the left hand, it starts to sound a little bit thin, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So first of all, when we're talking about improvisation and we're talking about solo piano, and really it doesn't matter if it's solo or group, but the thing to really remember is that the left hand, right hand as well, but right now we're talking left hand for accompaniments. Your left hand is kind of a combination of different accompaniment techniques, tricks, concepts, whatever word you want to put to it, all right? So by that I mean, okay, if I'm doing, again, My Romance, chords, in case, someone doesn't know it, B flat major, C minor, D flat diminished, C minor, F7, B flat major. In this case, I'm playing them as chord shows. And by the way, that's not the only set of changes. Another nice one is to go to the E flat 7. Anyway, we'll use these for right now because that's what's out of the real book. So right here, I'm playing shells, right? Just open, root 7 or root 3. And then typically if I'm going to add that melody in there, right, and throw in some other notes like the 3rd and the 9th, it really helps to fill that chord out and sound nice and full. But now if I start to improvise and I'm just playing these shells here in the left hand, it sounds a little bit thin. That's one particular accompaniment style. I could do triads if I really wanted to. I could do 7th chords, right? So I could do a bass line. Okay, I could do like arpeggios. I could do like kind of like a root stomp, stride kind of deal. I could do rootless chords, right? So I have many different chordal or accompaniment options that I do in the left hand. With each one of those options comes if we had like a curve or a chart, we could chart out the density of that chord, right? So like if I play just single note root, let's just say I do that. Obviously the density of this is pretty light, right? There's not much going on there. If I do triads, right, it's a little bit more dense. If I do 7th chords, it adds more density. If I do rootless chords, it adds density, but then also adds some tensions in there. If I do shells, it's kind of in the middle, right? So each one of those accompaniment patterns kind of has its own flavor to it. When you decide to solo, you get to decide, well, what do you want to do? Right? So do you want it to be more dense or do you want it to be less dense? So for instance, if I'm going to play the tune, right, and I'm just going to use my shells, right, so I could do that. I'm using the shells in the left hand, I'm filling in notes, going through that whole step-by-step standards approach and creating an arrangement. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. I think that it sounds pretty decent. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to improvise over this. And then when I start to improvise, it's like... right? And you're like, it's like kind of thin down there in the left hand because when I played the arrangement, right, again, I had those inner voices going, right? I had those inner notes going on which helped to fill out that chord. So now the question is, what do I do? How do I make that fuller sounding chord when I improvise? Well, shells might not be the ticket for you. Maybe you want to do a bass line. Right? So maybe it's a bass line that you want to do. Maybe you're going to do, something like this. Right? And here I'm playing kind of like a root, and I'm hitting the 5th and the 3rd, like doing a 6th on top. But the thing to remember is that everything that I'm doing in the left hand is just a different color, a different palette, a different concept, a different way of accompanying yourself. However you want to think about it, it's just different ideas, and then it's up to you to decide which one of them do you want to use and why. A bass line is going to kind of give you a little bit more motion. Doing something like this kind of gives you that like back and forth kind of feel. Doing shells kind of fits the bill, gets the job done, but it's a little bit thin. let's say I really want to go super thin, right? So I'm at the end of the song. So you see, I was really just kind of like pedaling that 5 going on, the F, super thin, and it allowed me just all of this room in the right hand to play my improvisation. But there was almost nothing going on supportive-wise in the left hand for what I was doing in the right hand. That was a conscious choice that I made. Let's say I want to do the shells. Right? Shells, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it might sound a little bit thin. But then I could say, all right, well, okay, it's a little bit thin. Maybe if I add some rhythm to it. Right? Now it starts to fill out a little bit. Then I could say, maybe I'm going to go into a bass line. Maybe I'm going to do like, like kind of do that idea. But the point is that that left hand is, you could dial in or dial back the amount of density of the chords. So it's really up to you to decide which left hand accompaniment do you want to do. Now in making that decision, obviously, what also has to come into it is, can you pull it off, right? If you're like gonna like do this kind of thing, and it's like, right, and you can't play it, well then forget it. Then that's off the table. And this gets into what we've talked about many times before of like owning a concept, right? Like really owning something. This is why I say start with shells. Even though I know the shells sound thin, they don't sound super full, but they're a lot easier to be able to kind of get in your brain and get under your fingertips. In addition to that, you're also really targeting that 7th and the 3rd with those shells, right? And we already know what's the 3rd and the 7th. That's your guide tones, right? So you're kind of getting some guide tone work in those shells as well, right? And one way in which you can kind of give a little bit more life to those shells is like kind of doing the 4 to the floor, or even just doing like, right, so you see what I'm doing there? Rather than playing the shell like that, I just break it up and kind of make like a faux bass line out of it using that. But anyway, does that make sense to you, Michelle, where that left hand, you have a wide range of different ideas that you could choose in the left hand, and it's really to you to decide what sound are you going for. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that I have to, in some way, learn another left hand than what I played when I created an arrangement. That's all. That's the point. Yeah.
Or I mean, but now, like whatever you did in the left hand when you created the arrangement, like when you're doing, what was it, My Foolish Heart, right?
Yes.
What was it again? Right, so you're doing shells down there in the left hand, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So if that's the case, so you could still do the shells down there, it just might sound a little thin, right? So if that sounds thin, then rather than just throwing away shells and saying, forget it, these shells are no good, it's like, it's too thin, I need to come up with something brand new. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just yet. Instead, take the shell, add in another note, add in the 3rd. So you see like the A minor 7 flat 5, throw the flat 5 in there. It creates some nice tension in there. When I go to the D7, maybe I just do the root 3. Or maybe I add the 7th in right underneath there, right? On the B flat. You know, add that third in there. Add the fifth in there. And so you see how I can add in some other notes with those shells to kind of prop them up a little bit, right? But again, it's really dependent upon you, like whatever it is that you're looking to do. The other thing that would sound nice on a tune like that is that idea. Right, so you see how I'm like doing that broken shell where you can kind of like do the broken shells and make almost like a little bass line out of it, right?
I love that. Yeah, okay. Wonderful.
All right, good job. Nice. Steve, pretend you're playing Slow Song in D minor. You want a solo that sounds a little like the Orient. What scale or chord would you use? All right, so... Probably what I do, I probably utilize my Phrygian scale. So this is the the third mode of the B flat major scale. Okay. So I utilize that Phrygian scale. That's going to sound nice. Why? Why am I going there? Because I'm looking for those half steps, all right? Those half steps really get... Okay, now, again, I dislike labels, and I really dislike, unfortunately, we can... get very politically incorrect with our labeling as well, right? Saying that this sounds like Middle Eastern or whatnot. It's not that clear, right? But just for general, right? For right now, like that kind of has that Middle Eastern kind of flavor or vibe to it, like an Orient vibe, like. A lot of times it would be pentatonic, so you could... You can get that pentatonic sound. All right, so that's D minor pentatonic, but then you could bring in that Phrygian scale. Phrygian sound also kind of gives you that, well, let's say non-Western kind of sound. It kind of sounds a little bit outside of Western music. Even though the Phrygian scale is used in Western music, it just kind of gives it that like kind of interesting shimmer and sparkle to it. So you can kind of mess around with that one.
Willie.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, you can hear me. I was on last week, couldn't get my microphone to work. I'm going to play something. Hear that bass line?
Yeah.
That's the bass line that's going on while this guy does a solo. And
yeah.
And I do and he starts off some kind of a weird thing like that. And I can't play anything right now because I sprained my right hand, but I do a lot of D minor arpeggios in there, and I do some stuff out of your funk fluidity lessons, which was a great lesson, and because I like to try to get both hands into it. And so this is the song I asked you about last week. I wasn't expecting you to know the song, Hold Your Head Up by Argent, but Rod Argent was the keyboard player. He's in the Zombies, if you remember that.
Hold your head up. Hey,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And in the live version, he does about a 60-minute solo, you know, and he goes crazy.
Yeah.
And I have to do that song, and I'm just
So that. Right, so like I'm not gonna worry about the bass because let the bass player take care of the bass, right?
Yeah.
So I would start off with that D minor pentatonic first of all.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, D minor pentatonic would be great. Then you could bring in that, what you call it, that Phrygian scale, like I said, which is just basically adding on those two notes. But then you could do stuff like. So you see how I'm like moving between D minor pentatonic and E flat minor pentatonic. You can kind of play around with that. Another thing that you could think about is since D Phrygian is the B flat major scale, forget about thinking about D Phrygian, just think your B flat major scale, right? But obviously don't keep coming back to B flat, like thinking that you're in the key of B flat. Just think about like, okay, I got to hang around D more, right? Or maybe hanging around the third and the seventh there. And then see, I can start to do things like. That's all just my diatonic triads right on B flat. Okay? That's all I'm doing. Like. I can even hang around just like kind of these notes right here, which is kind of based off of that D Phrygian as well. So I can start to build it from there and start to hang around with those few notes and then build it out from there. But D minor pentatonic, and your D Phrygian scale, start with those two. That'll get you going.
All right, great. I knew you would help me out. I tried the chordals like on Funk Fluidity, and that was a disaster. But anyway, thanks a lot. Hey, I like to watch Michelle's face while you're playing on the last call. Have a big smile on her face. It was great.
Excellent. Well, anyway, Michelle is a diehard music lover, so glad I'm able to bring a smile to her face when I'm playing. It. Good. All right. You betcha, Steve. John had a great question. Do you still listen a lot to other artists' music? If so, what do you usually listen to? Do you follow particular artist styles? Randomly listen to new music? With so much music being released, I'm curious how you decide what to listen to. I was just hip to a new band, Fernando Juego, I believe is how you say. It's a big band. But it's just killer stuff. So a lot of times what happens, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's new music coming on the market all of the time. So what the heck do you listen to? There's just so much. So a lot of times, for most of us, how will we find new music? You know, you get on the iTunes, Spotify, whatever it is, curated for you, different suggestions. Okay, yeah, so that's one way. Another way is once you find some artist that you like, you hear me talk about Brad Mehldau, Keith Jarrett, Oscar Peterson, Gene Harris, like any of these pianists, you could go to them, listen to them, and then what you do is, especially in the jazz world, take a look at the people that are on that album in that circle. So Gene Harris playing along with Ray Brown on bass, Now you take a look at Jeff Hamilton on drums, so then you can take a look, okay, so where else is Jeff Hamilton playing? And then you find that Jeff Hamilton might be playing with, Monty Alexander, say. And then you're like, oh, Monty Alexander. So you see, and Ray Brown is playing with Monty Alexander. Hey, who the heck is this Monty Alexander guy? Another fantastic pianist. And now you're like, bing, now you get somebody new to listen to. The other thing how I find new music as well is talking to other musicians. So like that band Fernando Juego, I learned about last night, like during the rehearsal from the bass player. I didn't know about them. So now I kind of clue into that, and I'm listening to that. And then again, on that album, you could see all of these other people. Like, I'm really kind of interested. I got to research and find out who the drummer is on this album, because they're just killer. And I'm curious who else they play with. So in the jazz world, there's a lot of cross-pollination, a lot. When you start getting into the rock pop world, you almost never even know who's the artist, right? Like if you listen to Taylor Swift, unless there's like a guest artist playing with Taylor Swift, you're probably not thinking, well, who's the bass player on that, or who's the drummer on that? You got to kind of dig in a little bit and get a little bit more information. So you don't have that same cross-pollination in some other styles. Not to say it doesn't happen, it's just not as prevalent as it is in jazz. Being a side man or side woman, a side person in jazz is very, very common, right? Like you'll find like Christian McBride, playing on, Chick Corea, like all these different players. You'll find him playing and being a side person behind all of these other artists. So in jazz, it's a little bit easier to kind of see and discover that cross-pollination. But that's kind of how I do it. The other thing, another place to take a look at is take a look at the community area where people are sharing what they're listening to. And you can get some ideas there.
Okay, thanks, Willie.
You got it, John. You got it. Lloyd, 2 questions on Saturday night. It's all right for fighting. All right, go ahead, Lloyd.
Hi, Willie. Yeah, I learned that a long time ago, just for the piano solo. We played it with the band. Now I relearned it again, because the new band is playing with it, and we probably have a more sophisticated bass player. So my bass, was interfering with his bass, which I guess is a typical problem. So 2 questions. One is from, I know you're not a doctor, so
I just play one on TV.
So I know the disclaimers, but the section where I'm playing like a G, a D, and a G, and the G is below middle C. When I sit at the piano or keyboard, I'm usually sitting in the center of the keyboard. So when I practiced that afternoon and by the evening, my wrist was really killing me. And I think it was, like if you're sitting in the middle, but you're playing a lot of the notes below middle C, your wrist has to turn. So is the proper way to shift myself, because a lot of that song is below middle C? Or yes.
All right. So the first thing is exactly what you're doing. You want to do that, and you can even dive even a little bit deeper on that. And what I mean is getting data. All right. So anytime there is pain, anytime you have pain at the instrument, right, whether it be in your wrists, your arms, your neck, wherever it is, you want to get a little bit of data and figure out what the heck is going on and why. So it's always a good idea to kind of write a note for yourself or have a video, because what you don't want to do is just whatever, it'll go away on its own. No, it likely will not, and there's a good chance it can get worse, and it's a good chance that what happens is as you start to get pain or tension or whatnot, it starts to build up, right? And then it starts to get inflamed. And if you're not careful, that could be, you could get yourself into problems. So that's the first thing. Get some data so what you're doing is good. Now, in terms of moving around, yes. Like, you're never going to be just static. Like, when I'm playing, like, I'll be moving around all over the place. Normally, my bench right now is going this way. So normally, I would have it going the long way, like this. While I'm teaching, I have the long way coming back here because I don't need all of this space here. But a lot of times, I'd be like, kind of like, I might be moving around, maybe not as dramatic as that, but definitely there's motion going on. And I am always shifting on my sit bones. So if you stick your hand underneath your behind there, right, you could feel those two bones, right? And this is also a good thing, right? Not trying to be crass or anything, people, but really important stuff. You stick your hand underneath your behind there and you slouch, you could kind of feel those bones do this and they kind of shift forward. And then when you sit up, you could kind of feel that bone almost like go straight on down like that. Try it. It's really kind of interesting, the body mechanics of it. But when I'm playing, I'll shift from one bone to the other. I could literally feel it, right? I could feel like I'm on that bone, now I'm on this bone, right? And if we take a look at the physiology of the body, right? You got your pelvis and you got those kind of bumpy bones at the bottom there. You can figure out what they're called, I don't know. But anyway, you're shifting from one to the other. So I'm doing this, right? I want to be careful that I'm not doing this, right? I don't want to do that, right? Instead, I'm doing this. Shifting, 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 and trying not to shift and do this in which I'm like doing some kind of crazy turn in my back, because obviously that could be a problem. So yes, definitely shifting back and forth like that. Some shifting like actually lifting and shifting, okay? But it's usually more of a shifting from side to side, okay? That's usually enough.
When I shift side to side on that, my wrist is still bent. It's still to get in that position.
Right, so this is the next part of it.
I mean, the G, D,
right.
G.
So
my wrist is bending. So it's more comfortable if I literally move myself, further down below C.
All right, so this is the other part of the equation here as well, is that, let's say, well, first of all, what hand are you doing? You're doing it with your right hand?
Right, that's the right hand, sorry.
Okay,
right.
All right, so let's say I'm doing this G chord right here, right? I'm doing it like this, right? And like, I know it's kind of hard because this is cut off, but let's say I'm doing this, right? Now, if you take a look at this, now I'm being dramatic right now with this, okay, just so you could see this. If you take a look at this, what do you notice? Take a look at the line here, right? So see the line? That's the line, right? There's my arm, right? But what's happening? I got this angle, and then I have that angle going that way, right? So I got an angle here, and I got an angle here. So I'm literally doing that, right? With my hand, it like looks like an angle like that. Now we know full well, do you ever do that? Do you ever walk around with your hand like that? Well, no, you walk around with your hand like this, right? Straight. So we know that a straight line like this is going to be the most relaxed position for the arm. So if we're doing anything like that and twisting it like, left to right, even though we might not have pain and even though it's properly fine, we have to also understand logically we are adding on a certain amount of tension. If you question that, then just simply hold your hand like that for 4 hours and you see how your hand feels after that. It might not feel bad for 5 minutes, but after an hour, you're going to be like, it's going to kill. So there's tension that's created anytime we're doing that. So we have to know that when I'm doing this, right, I'm already created tension. So how do I try and avoid that tension as much as possible? This is where I shift the depth of how I'm playing, okay? So here, see how I'm playing with my thumb just at the very tip, but these two are moved back, okay? And again, it's kind of hard to see because the way I have this all cropped. So let me do it from this way, right? So I can play like this, but if I shift, see that? See how shifting on the key, right? And I call this deeper, shallow. That's the deep end, that's the shallow end. So I'm shifting like those notes. I'm still going to play these same 3 notes, but if I shift my thumb up here, then it does that for my wrist. If I do this, okay, so you see like the most comfortable position is when these two are higher up and this is shallower, okay? That looks straighter. Obviously, I'm going to play it more down here. So like take a look at the positioning here. See how these two, like that's up higher. This is up the highest, right? And this one way down at the bottom here. So probably what's happening is you're doing something like that, right? And then that, you can see it right here. See that turn in the wrist? And all I'm doing is literally deep and shallow. But that deep and shallow changes around that whole position of the wrist. So that's what you want to pay attention to. So when you're playing this down here, if you find that, hey, wait a second, like, you know, this is hurting, you're likely doing that. You're likely playing them more in line when in reality you should be doing that and shifting it around a little bit.
All right. That's a great idea. I didn't think of that. I would have to see how I'm playing it. But yeah, if I can't get the thumb shallow enough, you know, and then have that angle where the wrist is then straight, I guess then I could shift my body down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an option to shift around. Absolutely. You know, and also depending on the type of music you're playing, are you going to be standing or sitting?
I sit.
Okay. All right. No, that's fine. I mean, I sit too, but I mean, like, there's sometimes I'll do gigs in which I'm standing if it's like a rock thing. Yeah. I mean, if you're sometimes standing, then that's a lot easier, right? Because you can
sometimes
move around.
They want me to, but yeah, I usually sit.
Yeah, okay. So if you're sitting, then yeah, then you could shift on your bench. There's absolutely nothing wrong with shifting on your bench, all right? Playing the instrument should be dynamic, meaning that you shouldn't be stiff. It shouldn't be like, I'm always in this position, right? It should be like you can move around as much as you want as long as it's serving a purpose, right? Because, again, you got to remember that movement is now more energy and time and all of that that's being expelled.
All right. I think years ago, if I remember, I may have been diagnosed a little bit with like carpal tunnel, and they gave me a brace, which I found hard to. So that might have aggravated that. I'm thinking, because it was really, by the evening, I was like, wow, I hope I didn't, you know, rip a tendon or something. It was really pretty painful. Wow. So I think this will help.
And if you're having that pain, you can never go wrong with ice. All right? I mean, I can't think of really one scenario in which ice is going to exacerbate the situation. Now, it's possible that ice won't help, but ice almost always helps the situation, or at least reduces the pain. And what you could do is take a paper towel or something, fold it over, and then put the ice pack on it. Don't put the ice directly on your skin. It doesn't have to be that cold.
I've done it with my back, and by the next morning, the wrist felt a lot better.
Yeah.
So, but your suggestion, I think, will really help. And just quickly, the last part of the question. So with the bass player, first of all, because I learned it, you know, as a soloist, it was difficult to either not play the bass or I didn't know what to do with my left hand. I ended up, because it's a little, you know, it's sort of syncopated rhythm.
Yeah.
I ended up either trying to play my left hand bass just very light, or not at all, and just pretend like I was playing it just so I could get my hands working together. But trying not to hit the keys. I didn't know what else to do.
Let's say that, you know, let's take a pattern here that would be very hard to separate left and right. Okay, so let's just say you're doing a pattern like, right? Very simple pattern, right? So this is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and now the bass player is like, Lloyd, thank you very much. I got the bass down here. So now it has to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, right? And it's like, oh, geez, like trying to hit those upbeats. So then what do you get? See what I'm doing?
Yep.
Or I could do that as well, but I could literally just play up here, right? Or you could kind of do it down there, but that's real tough. So anything that's syncopated like that, and what you need, so you could get away with doing something like that, and that would be perfectly fine, and that would likely help you to be able to execute that rhythm a little bit cleaner.
That's kind of what I did, and then after getting into it a little, I was able to actually do it just with the right hand, but I didn't know if I was supposed to, you know, be doing something else in the bass. You know, I probably
Well,
could
you
have.
know, I mean that's a larger question, but yeah, I mean
Yeah.
I'm sure
All right,
there
I don't wanna
probably
take up
is
too much
something
time.
else that you could do. I mean, like you could probably just get it, whatever it is, right? But I mean, the
Yeah.
point is, like, you could just hold down like root 5 or holding down the root. Typically, where it gets into a problem with bass players is the activity that you have in the left hand. I mean,
rhythm.
you know, again, let's go back to Steve's example. All right, so say that's the bass line, right? And now you're going to do. So if I'm just playing the D down there and I'm not like futzing around and doing all this stuff and a bunch of activity, then the bass player is probably not going to get upset about that because I'm not really conflicting with what they're doing. So it really is sometimes less about notes and more about rhythmic activity.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
You got it. All right, Gil, I'll be right back to you. I'm going to switch over here to YouTube and Facebook. I've got a couple of questions. Let's see, Pamela, does it have more notes on a piano than a keyboard? Depends on what you get. You could get like 73 note keyboards, 61 note keyboards. What's the other one? I always forget the denominations. 56, I think. But a full piano is 88 notes. A nice little tidbit, you can get a Bösendorfer grand piano that actually has extra notes down there. It's something like, I don't know, 91 notes or something, kind of cool. And those notes down there are really kind of neat. But it's more for special effect than they just sound like, bleh, you know. So anyway, some pianos, even acoustic pianos, like I said, the Bösendorfer, have more than 88 notes. But typically, it's 88 notes for a piano. A keyboard, a full-size keyboard is typically 88 notes, but it could be 76, you know, and then other denominations from there, you know, if it doesn't have all 88 notes. Joseph, keyboards are just types of digital piano, and since they have four, okay, so thank you, Joseph. You kind of answered that for me. Hello, Eric. Frank, how do you learn a funky groove? Left hand first, then right, or do you try to break it down slow in both hands? It really kind of depends on the groove. A lot of times when it comes to like a funk thing, like doing something like that. It's like a groove like that is so intertwined between the left hand and the right hand. Like you could find like, right? I mean, the right hand, you could play it by itself, but almost doesn't make sense without the left hand. And then the same thing vice versa. You could play the left hand by itself, but it almost doesn't make sense without the right hand. So typically with certain grooves like that, I would be working on them hands together right away, slowly. Right, so you like break it down very slow, and then what you make sure that you do is rather than trying to play multiple measures, see if you can get just the first beat, then the first 2 beats, the first 3, then the first 4 beats, right? You start to build it like that, 1 beat at a time. If it's 16th notes, it could even be a half a beat at a time, right? So you start very slow and you build it up hands together. Like I said, that's most grooves. It really depends. If you find that like it's mostly the right hand that's very active or the left hand that's very active, then yeah, then you might end up, you know, practicing that left hand first. Like I'm thinking like, the bass line for the chicken. Like, so you might work on that before. You know, before you start bringing in the right hand. So really get that left hand down because it's very left hand heavy there, and then you could bring the right hand in later. But a groove that's very active between the 2 hands, you're probably going to want to play it hands together right from the beginning, just slowly. Let's see. Arturo says, Frank, always practice your scales with both hands, first right, then left. You should really be able to play as fast with both hands and with the same proficiency and always with a metronome. All right. So I agree with many of those points, Arturo, but it's never, like anytime that we ever say you should always do this or always do that, we always have to take all of that with a grain of salt. Starting from the back end first, always with a metronome. You don't have to do your scale always with a metronome every single time. Now, that's not to say that playing with a metronome is not absolutely valuable, good, and should be done. That's not what I'm saying. But if you don't know your scale well enough, adding in a metronome or a drum beat or something like that is only going to then perhaps confuse you and then throw you off. The other thing, too, that I find that happens a lot is like, okay, here's my metronome. Okay, I'm going to play along with the metronome. And it's like, I'll hear students do that quite often, and it's like, well, wait a second. Yes, you're right. You have the metronome on, but you are not playing along with the metronome. And the problem is that if you start playing with a metronome too soon, just thinking that somehow, like magically, if this thing is like ticking away there, somehow you're like getting better at playing with the metronome. It doesn't work like that. In fact, the opposite can be true. If you put that metronome on and you just start playing with it, and then you're not really listening to it and locking into it, all right, so there's triplets against the quarter note, right? If you're not locking into that and you're off from the metronome, but you continue to have it playing kind of in the background, well, guess what? Now that metronome becomes relegated to this background noise that you don't pay attention to. So logic holds, you keep doing that over time, what then happens? Now you no longer listen to the metronome because you're so used to it just being on and you never listened to it in the first place. So everything kind of has its place and its time, right? I would agree, starting with the right hand for a scale first and then doing the left hand first by itself. So do the right hand by itself, do the left hand by itself, then doing it hands together. That works usually most of the time. But again, we have to be careful at saying that's the way it's always supposed to be. Because let's say that, you know, there are some students that I work with that they have one hand that hurts or, you know, is not working as well as the other hand. So in that case, well, no, you might not start with the right hand. You might end up starting with the left hand and then do the right hand. Or maybe you never even do the right hand. Maybe it's just left hand by itself and maybe you do chords in the right hand. So everything has to be kind of funneled down into what is really best for the students. But in general, yeah, I agree. Like you should be playing them hands separate, playing hands together, do one octave, do two octaves, do contrary motion, add in the metronome, make sure you're playing along with the metronome. If you don't want to play with a metronome, playing with a drum beat is just as good as playing with a metronome, right? Especially at the level that we're at. Now look, you want to be playing jazz clubs and you want to be playing Carnegie Hall and you want to be the next cat who's it, then yeah, then you should be doing metronome. You should be doing metronome on 2 and 4. Try doing the metronome just on 4. Try doing the metronome on the end of 1. Like you do all of that crazy stuff. But if you're playing for your own enjoyment, you just want to learn some jazz piano and be able to play a little bit, then and you're like, I don't really dig the sound of this metronome, which, come on, it gets kind of boring after a while, this tick, tick, tick going on, and you'd rather play along with a drum beat? Sure. Same triplets. Right, so same triplets going on there. I'm just playing along with a drum beat versus a metronome. Right, so there's gray in everything, and it's always like figuring out what works best for the particular students. Let's see here. How do I interpret chordal voicings? They always seem a bit ambiguous to me. I have a whole bunch of lessons on that. I'm not going to dive into that right now. Take a look at the lessons at Jazz Edge. Because I have some great lessons on your chordal voicings. Basically, think about your chordal voicings as kind of like being open voicings, which they are. Like in this case, here's a C6, and I'm adding in the 9th, the 5th, and the root up top, so I'm building a chordal on the 9th. I could play around with this, and I could have chordals on different notes. So on a major chord, I could build a chordal on 9, I could build it on the third, could build it on the sixth. Those three right away are really going to give me some nice sounds. I could also build it on the sharp 11, like that, right? Okay, so anyway, check out the lessons on the site for chordal voicings. Let's see. All right, so moving back here to Zoom. Gil, you had a question about exercise 25, inspiration. Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, I'm a little behind, so I'm just getting to 25 now, but I was watching the video and you showed some kind of alternate voice for the F7, well, for the alternate chord in that the 2-7 flat 5, 5-7 alternate, 1 major voicings. And then you stopped. You said you were getting ahead of yourself. Was that like a plug-in for this form, or was that did that belong to the B form?
Oh, let's see. I don't remember what the voicing was that I showed. All right, so if I'm taking a look at the music here. So we had the C minor 7 flat 5, and then the F7 altered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, do you remember what the alternate voicing was?
I think that was it, because let's see.
Because that's right in the music, right here. I'm taking a look at this right from the exercise 25 inspiration music.
Really? Yeah. Because I have like.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. In the music is a G flat.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Can I use that as an alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. So rather than putting in the flat 9, you could use a sharp 9. In fact, if you take a look at, I just released the My Funny Valentine videos this morning, and you'll see in the rootless chords how I'm changing it from a G7 flat 9 to a G7 with a sharp 9. So the sharp 9 and flat 9 is almost always interchangeable, right? So let's say that you have a song and it's like, right? So here's F7 with a flat 9, and the melody note is my flat 9. I'll even do that to just really accentuate it, right? So, okay, so there's my flat 9 in there. I'm putting in the flat 13 as well. See how I can add in a sharp 9? Flat 9. Sharp 9, right? So the sharp 9 and flat 9 are both going to sound well, and you can even play them together sometimes as well. Obviously, it always depends, like voicing. You're going to kind of take it, on a case-by-case basis to see if it sounds good. But the reason they sound good, either one, is because they're a whole step apart, right? Whereas 9 and flat 9 or 9 and sharp 9 together ain't going to sound so good because, right? Like, let's see here. Right? If I'm doing something like that, it's not going to sound good. That's not going to sound good because it's a half step. But here, check it out. Here I'm playing F7 with a flat 9 and a sharp 9. There's B flat 7. Right? So it actually sounds good with the sharp 9 and the flat 9 combined together. So yeah, you can use those interchangeably. Again, that was the C minor 7 flat 5, and then we were going to the F7 altered, right, with a flat 9 in there, but we can also do that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I mean, it sounded good, and then you backtracked and said, "Well, not for now."
Yeah.
So, but I was also I try to get a lot of mileage out of your 12 key exercises. So. I was thinking about. I noticed I can use that as end it with a minor, like a minor chord, instead of just by lowering 2 notes. I can go to.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So I try to get a lot of muscle memory. Work on muscle memory while I'm doing it.
Absolutely.
And
it's good because a minor 7 flat 5, like that minor 2-5 would typically resolve to a minor chord, but doesn't have to always, okay? And we could see that there are instances in which it doesn't, and that's why we're doing the 2-5 going to major. But yeah, that major chord, you could replace that major chord with a minor chord, and that sounds beautiful.
And is the B is the B version coming pretty soon? Because like what I did was your exercise 19, that was 12 keys.
Yep.
Then you gave us the B section. I actually made big card. I shrunk them down, made big cards, put one on top of the other, and so I could switch, anytime between A and B wherever it fit on the keyboard. So
I will make a note to myself right now that you want the so B version of number 25 inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me it really helped because my muscles got used to. Once I practiced each one separately until I pretty much had it. I had it down, and when I started mixing them up, I made a lot of mistakes, but I would just go back and kept on working. And after a while, I got to the point where I could see where one would work better depending on where I was on the keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
One would work better, and I can now switch between the two while I'm playing the iReal track.
Yeah. Now, let me explain. If we take a look at exercise 25, the inspiration, C minor 7 flat 5, F7 altered or flat 9, okay, to B flat major. Okay, so to make the B version, literally all you're going to do is bottom 2 notes, up an octave. Right?
Oh, okay.
And then to go to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's so the B version of those voicings are just take the bottom 2 notes, flip them up an octave. Right?
Oh, okay.
That's the same thing for every one of them. Okay. So in other words, let's make it a little bit simple. D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Right. So I take that D minor 7, take those 2 notes, bring them up here. Now on the G7, take those 2 notes, bring them up there, and then for C major, take these 2 notes and bring them up here. Okay? So that's the concept.
Okay.
I will do it though for you because sometimes it's just easier to see it written, right? But just so you kind of understand and know the concept, it's just taking those bottom 2 notes and then flipping them up an octave.
And will you be making it so that the iReal fits both? Because that's the way I like to practice them. It's really nice. Like I said, I made a long card. I shrunk both of those other exercises down, made a long card, and since they both fit with the same iReal, I can put one card on top of the other, on my stand, in front of me, and I can just look, and I can work it out,
Well, you'll be glad to know that. Well, first of all, voicing wise, so in other words, if we're doing like right now we're doing this. Right? So we're doing that, but now if we move to this, that voicing is going to work over the iReal Pro, either way. So in other words, like the iReal Pro track will stay exactly the same because whether you do that voicing for C minor 7 flat 5 or that voicing for C minor 7 flat 5, to iReal Pro, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, as long as the keys go in the same order. That's what I was saying.
Right. Well,
like,
keys going. Like okay. All right. Yeah. No. I'll keep the keys in exactly. In fact, to be honest with you, I won't even make a new iReal Pro track. There will be no need.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because it's exactly the same thing. I'll just do those voicings for you, so you could.
Because like I said, the way exercise 19 and the other one, the A and B form worked out. It was like great. I could just I put the iReal Pro on like almost unlimited, a million times, just let it play and just start playing around and use those cards at first because I wasn't solid with them. But by doing that, I got it in my muscles and my ears. And now it's like easy.
Well, one thing you guys I think are going to be really happy about is piano accompaniment essentials. We're going to end up moving into that as we go along, right? So it's going to be several months down the road, but whereas I put in those rootless voicings and these different voicings in TCI, and there's a structure to those rootless voicings in the inspiration section, it's going to be much more structured in PACE. right? In pace, it's going to be like, okay, now we're going through these. Then here's the other form. Now this. Now the other form. Now that, you know, it's going to be very structured, and you're going to have all of those tracks to play along with. And I'll also make sure that you have all of your music. And I also like the idea of making some of those voicings like bigger, like those bigger cards like you're talking about. So I'm going to think about that idea as well, and make something where like maybe you can, you know, download a sheet and cut it into 4s, and you have like these nice big groupings of voicings. But anyway, in the PACE program, you're going to find that we're going to go through those voicings, because that's really what that program is all about, is really getting down those accompaniments. And getting down those accompaniments means things like really knowing all the triads, really knowing all the seventh chords, really knowing bass line, really knowing rootless chords. And it's going to be much, much more structured in that program. Whereas, like I said, in TCI and Standards by the Dozen, there's a nice structure to those voicings in those programs. However, those programs are not designed to teach just the voicings, right? TCI is what? Improvisation. Standards by the Dozen is learning standards, right? You're getting those voicings in there, but in PACE, that's where it's going to be like more, you know, systematic. We're going to be going through those different voicings. So it's coming.
Oh, good. Yeah, great. I noticed so many great players, well, really good players that I've heard, don't really know that much theory. They learn muscle.
Yeah.
And they know where their hand just, you know,
Yep.
So that's why I was asking about that.
Yeah, it's, yeah, I mean, like, to each their own. There's a lot of players that are fantastic players that, you know, can't read a lick of music either. You know, I think with all of that, the dangerous part, well, first of all, it's fine for them as an artist, right? So, you know, you could be a painter and be colorblind, right? I mean, it's like, so, like, if that works for you as an artist, that's fine. Where the danger comes in is when we as spectators look and say, oh, well, you know, I believe Eric Clapton said he can't read music. I believe. I don't know for a fact. You can look it up. But if I look at it and be like, well, Eric Clapton can't read music, so that means I don't need to read music, right? That's where our danger comes in. It's good that you recognize that, okay, yeah, you see these players that can like get around the keyboard and they know the feel of stuff, but they don't understand the theory of it, right? And that might work for their playing, but definitely when you understand the theoretical stuff, oh, you have a much deeper understanding for sure of what it is you're doing. So.
Yeah, I took some lessons from Gerald Price when I was in college. He was a professor, like when he was, you know, back a long time ago. And he admitted to me he was learning to read music while he was a professor there. He was an adjunct. And, but he was really good at teaching me some hands, like you play these. He knew the names of his scale degrees, but he couldn't read a lick of music.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's like, and we all have stuff to learn. I have plenty of things on my list, on my punch list that I need to learn. But it's all just, you know, we were just rehearsing last night. We're going through the Sun clave and the rumba clave, and boy, talking about like the feel of that, and really just trying to feel that, you know, those anticipations and feel how it fits into the groove. Boy, what a challenge. Like there's always something new to learn. That's the beauty of this, right? That there's always something new that you can be learning. All right, well, anyway, with that, I need to go pick up the kiddos at school. So thank you all very much for joining me today. I will not be on next week. Next week, I will be on vacation. So there will be no Ask Willie Live next week. Instead, I will see you guys in 2 weeks. But for those of you that are members of the site, all the lessons that are supposed to be coming out, so I think PACE is coming out this week, TCI next week, all of that stuff is going to be coming out as scheduled. All right? That's it for me, guys. Take care. Have yourselves a good one.